episode of The Bookshelf, a brand new series produced by the Institute of South Asian Studies in Singapore, where we talk to authors about their books about South Asia, a region stretching from Bangladesh to Afghanistan and deep into the Indian Ocean. We also focus on people from South Asia, wherever they live in the world. My name is John Vater, a research associate at ISAS, and it's my great pleasure to be talking to Sujeev Shakya. Sujeev earned the title of Nepal's CEO, that is, Chief Eternal Optimist, for the optimism he projected in his book, Unleashing Nepal. But also, I believe, in the book we'll be discussing today, Unleashing the Vajra, Nepal's Journey Between India and China. Sujeev is a thought leader who traverses many worlds. He writes and speaks extensively on business, development, economy, and leadership, and writes a regular column for the Kathmandu Post. Sujeev, welcome.
Thank you, John.
So I want to begin by kind of exploring the transition between your previous book, Unleashing Nepal, and the book we're discussing today. In your introduction, you state that you thought about the need for understanding culture and society more deeply through observing basic behavior, whereas for your previous book, you looked at Nepal more through a corporate lens. So your book also confronts big questions, such as how Nepal can leverage its position between India and China, which in some ways you're juxtaposing with smaller questions of basic behavior. So what were your motivations for writing the book, and why is it so important to compare the two?
Thanks, John. When I wrote Unleashing Nepal, the reason I wrote Unleashing Nepal was that there were very few books on Nepal written by Nepalis that look at the history, the past, the present, and the future. And also at that point of time in 2009, Nepal was just opening up. You know, it was an open moment where you have a new form of government from a 240-year-old monarchy coming to an end to a federal democratic republic. So there was an open moment. And I was trying to look at like a corporate executive who spent 20 years in the corporate world to say that this is, what is your pestle, your political, economic, social, sort of, what is the context to look at a new vision? And most of it was driven about you need to have more investments, you need to have better management, you need more, sort of money to get this thing through, tackle poverty through creating wealth, typically how you think as a corporate guy. And then in my journey, of running this consulting company, BEAD, and chairing the not-for-profit Nepal Economic Forum, I got the opportunity to interact with multiple, companies, bilateral organizations, multilateral organizations, and then also got to travel a lot, on work. So that gives me new lenses. And then I look back and say that, hey, it's not only about money, but it's about positioning ourselves. And he said that, okay, we are not a small country, as I used to say in Unleashing Nepal, 30 million people, now currently about 46th largest populated country in the world, in between India and China. And India and China became also in the last 10 years, very important, points in future discourses of economy. And looking at 2040, where China and India perhaps are going to be the two big superpowers in the economic powerhouses, and Nepal is in between it. So can we hitch our wagons? Also, I went a bit back into history. Unleashing Nepal begins the unification of Nepal in 1776, but I go back in this book, Unleashing the Vajra, to look at, again, 15th, 16th, 17th century, India and China perhaps was 70% of global GDP. And so perhaps it's coming a full circle where India and China is going to be the two dominant economies, and when India and China was prosperous, Nepal was also prosperous. So I try to look at from, those perspectives in terms of how can Nepal unfold its future, and how can Nepal design its journey towards 2030, 2040.
And I think that one of the most wonderful aspects of the book, which I think will be very relevant for our listeners and viewers, is that you offer a very well-rounded perspective toward Nepal's positionality vis-a-vis these two countries, but also the path that it's charted through history. And so one of the things that I love most about the book is the kind of on the ground perspective that you offer. I feel like a lot of your book is through the narrative of foreign aid or through reports that are maybe written by development partners. But you have, extraordinary details in your book talking about the way in which things like development are interpreted locally. There's a tension between what you call an isolationist mindset and the global Nepali. So I'm wondering if you would like to maybe talk a little bit about some of these texture details and the ways in which culture and social factors may be affecting Nepal's growth story.
No, I think, John, when we are looking at Nepal, we forget that Nepal is the oldest nation state in South Asia. And if we look at historically, and Nepal also runs, like India, into thousands of years. So I, being a practicing Buddhist, been looking at Buddhism as a connector, traveling around. And then you see that how the globalization was already happening where, Buddhism was going all over. There was architectures from Nepal, flowing to different parts of Asia. So if you go to Beijing, you find the old cities modeled around the Kathmandu Valley. You have temples in Tibet built by, sort of Nepali artisans. You have, even when we go to places like Borobudur, you find similarities between how the stupas of Borobudur are built around, the stupas in Kathmandu. And so there is that connect. And we tend to forget that there was, centuries of history behind it. And also how Nepalis traveled, did trading in Tibet, and they moved around into places as far off as Malaysia and Southeast Asia. So there is that sense of connectivity, sense of a trading and a business mindset, which I don't think we really look at. And that also took cultures to different parts, be it, Buddhism going to Tibet and now forming the dominant narrative of Tibetan Buddhism. So these bring about a newer perspective to see that people migrated a lot. So migration, unlike the development reports talk about, is not a new phenomena. It's a 1,000-year-old phenomena of Nepalis migrating. So at the same time, the Hindu conservatism did isolate Nepal, and especially during the Shah and the Ranas, from a people who were going out to trade. Suddenly you had these rules that if you went out, you would become an outcast. Suddenly everything became isolated. And even if you read the first Shah king, Prithvinarayan Shah's, sort of his treatise called Dibyopadesh, he talks about how you have not to go out, you have to buy local, produce local. He propagates a very isolationist theory, which is based on a strong Hindu conservatism. So these are perspectives I try to bring in, which perhaps is not discussed or understood by people who just, as you mentioned, about parachute analysis. And also at a personal level, I traverse different worlds. So my ancestral temple I go to, which is about 800 meters from my house here, traditions have been continuing from 9th century out there. It's done in the same way. So I live those traditions, I observe them, and then I'm, sort of in the 21st century trying to figure out how Nepal should be in 2040. So when you live in these two different worlds, you get, multiple layers of perspectives. That what I try to weave in the book.
Mm. And being able to see the threads and interconnections between the past and present is one of the most wonderful aspects of reading. And there's a lot of change, obviously going on in the Himalayas right now. More recently, we have Nepal's tilt, geopolitically speaking, it seems, toward China, which began with the 2015 economic blockade. So today there have been questions about what direction Nepal will go, specifically regarding regionalization. You put forward an argument in your book that In order for Nepal to ensure, 8% growth rate per year to meet its development goals by 2030, it's important for it to take part in whatever regional frameworks, may be on the table. I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit about why regionalization and such participation is so important for Nepal going ahead.
I think, again, going back to a bit of history is going to be important because if you look at to our north, China was not our automatic neighbor. It was Tibet was our neighbor. But after, Chinese took over Tibet, China became our neighbor. But with Tibet, we shared historic relationship as a Himalayan kingdom, we shared our relationship between the southern parts of Nepal and parts of Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Bengal. So we need to look at, also India, not as the entire India, but we to say that what part of India does have connect with Nepal. And similarly, what part of China that has, connect with Nepal? What happens in Beijing or Shanghai doesn't really, matter to Nepal. And I think, frankly, till 2015 blockade, I think there's a lot of writing that Shanghai and Beijing did not really care what was happening in Nepal. It was only after the earthquake and the Indian blockade that, the interest grew. So regionalization is also important. Again, we go back, Nepal also benefited tremendously through trade and integration during the British India, when Calcutta was the capital of British India. And so if you look at it, there was deep ties between Kathmandu and Calcutta, and that's what the relationship was. It was beyond trade, it was beyond politics. There was strong social, cultural ties. But as the capital moved to Delhi, and we see how Delhi views everything, and I've written enough at it. There is then, it just became another, sort of a relationship that had to be managed, and the way Delhi looked at Nepal changed, and that also brought in a lot of challenges to this relationship. And till today, we have those challenges because of the fact that Delhi views Nepal as a small country like Bhutan and, like the erstwhile state, kingdom of Sikkim. But let's not forget, Sikkim is 500,000 people, Bhutan is 800,000 people, and Nepal is about 30 million people. But, then and also Nepalis looked at the same thing. They looked at ourselves being like Bhutan and the, Darjeeling district and, Sikkim. That's how you equate it to. So regionalization is going to be an advantage because Nepal needs to take advantage of what China comes up with BRI and the new platforms that are emerging, be it BIMSTEC, the Bay of Bengal initiative, be it BBIN, the Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal network. So I talk about the concept of East-South Asia, where Nepal has to look at its relationship east of its, country. So we talk about Bengal in India, Assam, and the northeast states of India, Bangladesh, and Bhutan, so which provides Nepal a leadership opportunity. So if you look at the coffee shops of Shillong or Dhaka, it is modeled around the coffee shops of Kathmandu. So that's that aspiration is there. So, and if you look at from a cultural standpoint, so a person in Shillong or Guwahati finds Delhi as distant as a person in Kathmandu, but they find Kathmandu and Nepal much closer. So it is about leveraging these people-to-people relationship, and Nepal can take up this catalyzing role. And that's what I've been continuously pushing through my, sort of work through Nepal Economic Forum into integrating this, sort of the East-South Asia and trying to work in an area which also has, if you put all the population together, it's about 220, 230 million people.
Yeah, so much about, finding answers is reframing the way that we think. And so your formulation of looking at East-South Asia and looking at some of the historic commonalities with Kolkata, or, actually just measuring the distance via different trade routes to the ocean was quite informative. I'll maybe ask you to shift slightly from your role as scholar and historian to maybe your more corporate executive role, where we talk about action plans. You argue in your book that it is important to articulate a vision, but an execution plan is also necessary. So I was wondering if you could share a couple of concrete steps that Nepal can take to meet its objectives. And in particularly, you derive interesting lessons from Africa and ASEAN. So I think some of our Singapore viewers may be interested to know, in particular, what some of those lessons might be.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we should look at is that what is our strength? Like as a corporate executive, we say that what is the strength of my company or what is the strength of my organization? So Nepal's strength is its demographics. 50% of our people are under 25, 70% are under 35. So we are a very young population. So it is time to see how we reap demographic dividends, which means like if you look at our current exports, it's about 37% of our export comprises of IT services, technology communication services. So that is 800 firms doing that. So how can we build that further? Which means that we have to integrate to the global economies in a strong way, which means we have to not only be open to foreign investments, but also allow Nepalis to invest and work outside, and which is a fundamental thing that all the countries that have grown in the past 3 decades have been able to do. Currently, Nepalis to invest outside Nepal is restricted. It's prohibited, actually. So that's one. The other is to move from a rent-seeking to an entrepreneurial mindset. When we talk about private sector, when we talk about businesses, to say that how do we ensure entrepreneurship thrives? It's not about rent-seeking on a dealership or a trade or a license, but how do you open up and how do you create an economic, entrepreneurial ecosystem? I think that's another key thing that we need to look at. And I think when you look at execution of vision, we don't have to do big things. I mean, yesterday I was tweeting about, and you would also realize, whenever you have to set up a call with Nepal, it's so difficult because of our only country that has got a 15-minute time difference in the world. And if you want to work with the world, then you need to do that. Similarly, if you see Singapore experience, Singapore's adoption of the English language helped it to integrate with the world. And Nepal needs to do that. The new constitution has, sort of removed the provision of English being an official language. So can you imagine, sort of if you want to open up for foreign investments and if you want to look up for, sort of opening up, not having English, is a big challenge. And it's also a big paradox because 100,000 Nepalis leave Nepal every year to study in Australia and UK and other countries, spending billions of dollars. So you have your workforce that is very much global thinking, but you do not have the platform to be able to operate with a global mindset. So naturally, there's going to be more migration. So these are some of the small things that we need to look at. And again, it's to see that you also need to have consistency, be it your rule of law, to be able to have policies that do not change at frequent levels. So these are basic things. Like we work in Rwanda and we've been for 8 years, and we've seen how a small country like Rwanda has been able to, through sort of literally looking at following Singapore, being able to have a very global mindset and to do things that sort of excite international investors and also help in the long run produce world-class sort of people, entrepreneurs or professionals. Hope that answers your question.
Definitely. And just to comment on the question of the time zone, that was even one part I had underlined in the book, and I thought, man, this guy is really thinking through everything. It's definitely a Benjamin Franklin type way of not leaving any stone unturned. So I'll maybe ask you to clarify one term, which you mentioned just now, which is rent-seeking. And this kind of segues partially into the final question, which regards societal transformation. So one of your central theses is that along with an economic transformation, along the lines that you previously mentioned, there also needs to be a change in mindset and societal behavior. And I think that this is a universal question, which is applicable to many countries across the world right now as we're kind of going through an upheaval and a lot of change. So I'm wondering if you could kind of elaborate on why this concept of things like integrity, empathy, civic behavior are so important.
Yeah, I think on the rent-seeking part, I've looked at it, and in the book I talk about the historical reasons by which we are a rent-seeking society. In terms of earlier, you have a piece of land that was given by your rulers, and you rent-seek on that land, which is very similar to a lot of stories in South Asia and in many other countries. So what rent-seeking does is that it gets into your head. And so everything becomes a rent-seeking. You rent-seek on a position in an NGO, you rent-seek on your caste, you rent seek on a dealership you get, or a position you have as an editor or a founder of a paper or a media house. So it's that restricts entrepreneurship, because rent seeking is completely contrast to entrepreneurship, which means that rent seekers basically try to create barriers so that nobody else can come in. They set rules that are not very conducive to competition, and so which means that they create this little bubble for themselves. And that's what we see happening. And through in business, through cartels, which I write extensively about, similarly in the development industry, I call the donorpreneurs and the grantpreneurs, they rent seek in a certain way. So that's completely antithesis to entrepreneurship. And if you look at Singapore, or if you look at some of the other countries that have done very well, is that they have allowed the ecosystem for entrepreneurship to flourish, risk-taking to flourish. And that's the contrast I see, which also leads to the societal behavior, is to see that until unless our societal behavior to changes from to rent seek to have an entrepreneurial mindset and look at smaller things. Because for me, again, in Unleashing the Vajra, the last chapter, when I talk about unleashing transformation, I looked at in the 20 years in Nepal, we have more people who are rich. I always tell, when people start complaining about Nepal, I always say, think of 5 family of friends who have done worse than what they were 20 years ago. You think of it. And it's very difficult. You might find that one family where they had to sell off their ancestral property because of an illness or something, but everybody has done well. Their kids have got better education. Today we have more PhDs, doctors, engineers, scientists, everything. But why do we see more garbage in the street? Why is it's so difficult to implement the ban of single plastic use? Or why is it that we cannot keep our, sort of basic street clean? Why do we cannot, sort of keep our open spaces? And then why do we not question the issues of corruption, which is so ingrained in our society, where we bribe gods, as I talk about, so it's bribing mere mortals becomes so easy. So these are things that I continue to look at. And I think, and this is more and more, I've been working with companies and organizations, until unless that societal transformation is going to happen, it looks very difficult to have the economic transformation. And again, if you look at countries like Vietnam, you look at countries even like Cambodia, which went through very difficult times. Again, I bring in Rwanda or Ethiopia. Their transformation has also a lot to do with societal transformation. It's not only investments. It's not only about having resources. Congo has a lot of resource, but it's not being able to do much. So I've been trying to look at it, and I think this is also sort of my continuous work I'm doing. And now my next piece of work I'm doing is on human transformation. So you have to have human transformation to have societal transformation, and societal transformation to have economic transformation.
And at the heart of transformation is a firm belief in optimism. And that is why you're called the chief eternal optimist. And it has been wonderful hearing from you, sharing your ideas about Nepal today. So thank you very much for joining the ISAS Bookshelf.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thanks.
So you've all been with Sujeev Shakya, discussing his latest book, Unleashing the Vajra, Nepal's Journey Between India and China, published by Penguin Random House, India. I'm John Vater, and this has been The Bookshelf from the Institute of South Asian Studies in Singapore. We hope you'll join us for future bookshelf discussions with authors from around the world. And again, thank you so much, Sujeev, and we look forward to talking with you in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, John. This has been very interesting. Thank you.